Risk number 3 is the Donroe Doctrine.
Goes back to the days of the Monroe Doctrine when President Monroe was saying, hey, all of you colonial powers from Europe, you've got to stay out of America's backyard, and the US will enforce that. The Donroe Doctrine goes a little farther. It's that the United States gets to determine what the outcomes are on the ground in the Western Hemisphere. It's America's backyard first, not just America first. And the implications of that for countries around the region, both politically, they should have leaders that are aligned with the United States and with President Trump in particular. Economically, they should get rid of Chinese transshipments, and the US should be the dominant economic power. They should be cutting good deals with the United States. And militarily, anybody that's an adversary might well get hit hard. On this latter front, of course, we're talking about Venezuela and Nicolas Maduro, where the Americans have been escalating, and intend for him to be out of power. And indeed, it's more likely than not by 2026, the end of the year, you will see the end of Maduro, either directly taken out, maybe even by an American SEAL team, or removed by the Venezuelan military, deciding that they're not prepared to continue to take all the military hits and the economic hits from the United States. But what happens on the back of that when the US is unwilling to engage in boots on the ground regime change? Those sorts of wars Trump consistently and continues to oppose. And how do you get a transition that is stable, that is functional, and doesn't lead to destabilization across Venezuelan borders and more broadly into the United States? Those are very big questions for 2026.
So that was what we recorded on Friday. Thought for purposes of transparency would be kind of interesting to share it with you, but events moved even faster than expected. Within hours of that taping, the United States went in and captured Nicolas Maduro and his wife and brought them back to the United States. That doesn't, of course, in any way change the risk. It confirms it. The Donroe Doctrine is not theoretical. Washington is now willing to determine outcomes in its own hemisphere directly. And the harder question for 2026 is what comes next? To what extent, if the United States is running the outcomes in Venezuela, are those outcomes aligned with what the United States wants? And what's the blowback in the country and more broadly? Now, when Trump says he is going to run the country, he doesn't mean he's sending Tony Blair in. The Venezuela plan is less well-developed than the plan in Gaza, and that has some very serious limitations. But the belief is that the or else from the United States is now very clear. And so the new interim Venezuela government, which to be fair is not a regime change, it's basically still the military and the leaders minus Maduro from the old regime, that they are much more willing to work with the Americans, specifically on oil, also on drugs, not necessarily on democratic elections, which aren't the priority for the Trump administration, or there's going to be significant military response. Things like taking the offshore oil rigs, which is relatively low risk and easy to do militarily and would send a very direct message. Plans like that, if the next administration in Venezuela chooses to be less than aligned with President Trump. That is where we are today, and the implications for not just Venezuela, but also for other countries in the region where the United States has already said that they are unhappy with either the governments or the way that narco cartels operate inside their territory. Countries like Colombia, for example, and Mexico, for example, big concerns in how that's going to work going forward. And now, back to the rest of the risk.
Will the U.S. also undermine the sovereignty of other countries the way they are with Venezuela? Might they take direct action against narco cartels in Mexico? The relationship has been pretty well managed so far, both by the United States and by Claudia Sheinbaum, the Mexican president. But if the U.S. were to intervene directly against the narco cartels, that would be a red line for the Mexicans. Could see something like that happening in Colombia, too. There's also the question of how effective the U.S. can be in the Donroe Doctrine when the Chinese are the dominant economy trading with most of these countries. And for many of those countries, they are unprepared, they are unwilling to accept a dominant U.S. voice over their political decision-making. They want to do more business, more trade with China. And is this more of an opportunity for Beijing with some of these countries over the course of the year? The answer to that is almost certainly yes. Long term, that causes more conflict between the U.S. and China. This year, it does not. But this year does show that the Donroe Doctrine is going to drive a lot of uncertainty in the Western Hemisphere.